The year was 2387. For 300 years, the Galactic Empire had ruled every corner of the known universe with an iron grip. From the frozen moons of Zethar Prime to the burning gas clouds of the Velian Nebula, no civilization dared to breathe without the Empire's permission. Thousands of star systems, hundreds of alien species, and trillions of lives, all bowing under one flag. One throne. One name. Emperor Valdros III. His palace floated in the heart of deep space, a structure so massive it had its own gravitational pull. It was called the Eternal Throne, a space station the size of a small moon, wrapped in black armor plating and crowned with golden spires that caught the light of 3 suns. Inside that palace, Valdros sat every single day making decisions that shaped the fate of entire worlds. He ended wars with a signature. He started them with a whisper. Nobody questioned him. Nobody dared. The Empire's military was called the Iron Fleet, 40,000 warships, each one more powerful than an entire planet's defense system. Their generals were feared. Their soldiers were trained from birth. Their weapons could shatter a moon in under 6 minutes. The Iron Fleet had not lost a single battle in over 150 years. Some said they were unbeatable. Others said they were gods in armor. But on a quiet Tuesday morning, everything changed. Deep in the monitoring station on the outer edge of the Empire's border, a young analyst named Marcus Webb was sitting at his console, sipping cold coffee and scrolling through routine data logs. Marcus was 26 years old, thin, always tired, with dark circles under his eyes that never seemed to go away no matter how much he slept. He had been assigned to this station for 8 months, and absolutely nothing interesting had ever happened here. The most exciting thing he had seen was a meteor cluster shaped like a duck. He called it Gerald. Marcus had just started humming a song to himself when his console beeped. He ignored it. Consoles beeped all the time. Cosmic radiation. Passing debris. A confused satellite. He took another sip of coffee. It beeped again. Louder this time. He leaned forward slightly, one eye on the screen, still not fully paying attention. Probably another false reading from Sector 9. The sensors there had been glitching for weeks. He had filed 3 maintenance requests. Nobody had responded. Classic. Then the third beep came, and it wasn't a beep at all. It was a scream. Every single alarm on the entire monitoring station exploded to life at exactly the same moment. Red lights flooded the room. The walls shook. Every screen on every console switched to the same reading, the same coordinates, the same impossible number. Marcus stood up so fast his coffee cup hit the floor. He stared at the screen. He blinked. He looked away. He looked back. The reading was still there. A vessel. A single vessel. Appearing out of absolutely nowhere. Not from a jump point. Not from a wormhole. Not from any known travel method in any database the Empire had ever built. It had not decelerated from faster-than-light travel. It had not emerged from hyperspace. It had simply appeared. One moment, empty space. The next moment, something was there. And the size of it made Marcus's stomach drop through the floor. The vessel was 47 kilometers long. The biggest ship in the entire Iron Fleet, the Emperor's Wrath, their most powerful battlecruiser, was 9 kilometers long. This vessel was more than 5 times larger. It was not shaped like any ship Marcus had ever seen in any catalog, any history book, any war archive. It was long and narrow at the back, widening at the front into something almost like 2 open arms reaching outward. Its surface was completely smooth, no visible weapons, no engine ports, no docking bays. Just smooth, dark metal that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. And it was just sitting there. Not moving. Not firing. Not communicating. Just there. Marcus's hands were shaking as he reached for his communication panel. He had one direct line he had never used before, a line that went straight past every military rank, every secretary, every waiting room, directly to the office of Fleet Admiral Harlan Cross, the Supreme Commander of the Iron Fleet. He pressed the button. It connected in 2 seconds. "This better be worth your career," came the cold, clipped voice of Admiral Cross. Marcus swallowed hard. "Sir," he said, his voice barely steady, "we have a contact." Outer border, Sector 14. A single vessel. Sir, I need you to see this reading yourself because I don't think anyone is going to believe me if I just say the number out loud. There was a pause. Send it. Marcus transferred the data. The silence that followed lasted exactly 11 seconds. Marcus counted every single one. Then Admiral Cross spoke again, and for the first time in 20 years of military service, his voice carried something Marcus had never heard before in anyone of his rank.
Fear.
Lock the border, Cross said quietly. Wake the fleet. Wake the Emperor. Wake everybody. Of SYMJHY. This changes everything. Within 40 minutes of Marcus Webb's call, the entire outer border of the Galactic Empire was locked down. No ship entered. No ship left. Every communication array within 3 sectors pointed itself toward one single location, the coordinates in Sector 14 where the mysterious vessel sat, still perfectly motionless, still perfectly silent, still refusing to be anything other than impossible. Fleet Admiral Harlan Cross was 61 years old. He had fought in 14 wars. He had survived 3 assassination attempts, 2 planetary bombardments, and 1 catastrophic fleet engagement where he had lost half his ships and still managed to win. His face was a road map of scars. His hands were steady even when bombs were going off 10 feet away. Officers who served under him said he was made of something harder than steel, that fear simply didn't exist inside him the way it existed inside other men. But as he stood in the war room of the Eternal Throne and stared at the data Marcus had sent, something shifted behind his eyes that none of his officers had ever seen before. He studied the readings for a long time without speaking. The room was full of generals, admirals, and intelligence chiefs, the most powerful military minds in the known galaxy, and every single one of them was silent, watching Cross, waiting. Finally, he spoke. How did it arrive? His chief science officer, Dr. Lena Voss, small, sharp-eyed, with short gray hair and glasses she never actually needed but wore out of habit, stepped forward and pulled up the sensor replay on the main screen. It didn't travel, she said simply. Every form of FTL travel we know leaves a signature.
A wake.
A distortion. Hyperspace leaves a color bloom. Jump drives create a shockwave. Even the most advanced cloaking systems we've ever recovered leave a microtrail when they deactivate. She paused. This vessel left nothing. It is as if the space it now occupies was simply empty, and then was not. The room was very quiet. General Otto Brine, the Empire's most aggressive field commander, crossed his thick arms and leaned forward. Then it's a new cloaking system. Something we haven't seen. We go in, we board it, we take the technology. Problem solved. You want to board a 47-kilometer ship, Dr. Voss said flatly, that we know nothing about, that appeared from nowhere, that is currently sitting at the edge of our border doing absolutely nothing, and your plan is to immediately board it. My plan is to not show weakness, Brine said. Your plan is going to get people killed, Voss replied. Cross raised one hand, and both of them went quiet immediately. We observe first, he said. We send a scout wing. 12 ships. Stay at distance. Do not approach within 50,000 kilometers. Do not power up weapons. Do not transmit. Just watch. The orders went out within minutes. 12 of the Empire's fastest scout ships, sleek, dark, built for silence, crossed the border into Sector 14 and spread into a wide observation formation around the mysterious vessel. Their crews were the best in the fleet. Experienced.
Calm.
Professionals who had seen strange things before and handled them without panic. The lead scout ship was commanded by Captain Dana Reeve, 34 years old, one of the sharpest pilots in the entire Iron Fleet. She brought her ship to a stop at exactly 52,000 kilometers from the vessel and activated every passive sensor her ship carried. For 20 minutes, she and her crew observed in silence. The vessel did nothing. It simply sat there, enormous and dark and still, like a sleeping animal that didn't know it was being watched, or like something that knew very well it was being watched and simply did not care. Dana sent her first report back to Cross. No heat signature. No power readings. No crew life signs. No movement. Nothing. Sir, this thing looks completely dead inside. like it's been sitting here forever. Cross read the report. He read it twice. Then he looked up at Dr. Voss. A derelict? Possibly, she said carefully. Or it wants us to think that. How long do we wait? General Bryan asked impatiently. Cross was about to answer when every screen in the war room flickered at exactly the same moment. Every communication channel opened simultaneously. Every speaker in every room across every ship in the fleet crackled with the same sound, a deep, resonant hum that climbed slowly in pitch until it settled into something that felt almost like language, almost like music, and almost like nothing any of them had ever heard before. And then a voice came through. Not translated. Not scrambled. Not filtered through any conversion algorithm. Plain, clear, perfect English, or rather, the Empire's standard language, as if whoever was speaking had been studying it for years. We have been watching you build your empire for a very long time, the voice said. It was calm. Neither male nor female. Neither young nor old. It carried a weight that made the air in the room feel heavier. We have been patient. We have waited. But patience has a limit, and yours has been reached. Caro, the accounting begins now. Then the channel closed, and the vessel, for the first time since it appeared, began to move. The personal chambers of Emperor Valdros III were located at the very center of the Eternal Throne, surrounded by 40 layers of armor plating, 12 independent shield generators, and 500 elite palace guards who rotated shifts every 4 hours and had never, not once in the station's 300-year history, allowed a single unauthorized entry. Emperor Valdros was a large man, broad-shouldered, thick-necked, with heavy hands that looked more like a laborer's than a ruler's. He was 58 years old, but moved like a man of 40. His eyes were a pale, cold gray, the kind of eyes that made people feel like they were being measured, calculated, and filed away. He had ruled the empire for 22 years, inheriting the throne from his father, who had inherited it from his father before that. He did not believe in fear. He believed in power. Power was the only honest language in the universe, he always said. Everything else, diplomacy, negotiation, alliance, mercy, was just power with a mask on. When Cross woke him at 0300 hours with the words, "Your Majesty, we have a situation at the outer border that requires your immediate attention," Valdros did not panic. He put on his robe, walked to the war room at a calm, unhurried pace, and sat down at the head of the long table without saying a single word. He listened to the full briefing. He watched the sensor data. He read the ship's readings. He heard the recording of the mysterious voice once, then again, then a third time. He sat with his thick fingers laced together on the table and his pale gray eyes moving slowly from face to face around the room. When the briefing was finished, the room went silent, waiting for him. "One ship," he said finally. "Yes, Your Majesty," Cross said. "One ship sent to intimidate an empire of 40,000 warships." "That would appear to be the case, sir." Valdros was quiet for a moment. Then the corner of his mouth moved, not quite a smile, but something close to contempt. "Either they are supremely confident," he said slowly, "or supremely stupid. Either way," he unfolded his hands and placed both palms flat on the table. "They will learn the same lesson every enemy of this empire has learned. There is no version of the story where we are the ones who bow." General Bryan straightened up with barely concealed satisfaction. But Cross kept his eyes on the Emperor. "Your Majesty, the transmission. The fact that they broadcast in our language. That they said they've been watching us. The appearance method. None of this fits any known civilization in our databases. We have no intelligence on this vessel or whoever operates it. Engaging without. Send the Third Armada," Valdros said simply, cutting Cross off without raising his voice. "Full combat formation. Weapons hot. If that vessel does not identify itself and stand down within 1 hour of their arrival, destroy it." Cross held the Emperor's gaze for 3 full seconds, which was already 2 seconds longer than most people could manage. Then he nodded once and turned to carry out the order. The Third Armada was not the Empire's largest fleet. That was the first. But it was widely considered the most battle-hardened. 800 warships. Veterans of the Velian Campaign, the Zethar Rebellion, the Outer Rim Purge. Ships with battle damage welded over and painted gray and worn like badges of honor. Crews who had seen things that would have broken lesser soldiers and come back asking for a second tour. Within 3 hours, they were moving. From their staging point near the Kalen system, 800 warships accelerated in a coordinated formation that looked from a distance like a dark wave rolling across the stars. At its front, the flagship ISS Dominion cut through space like a blade, its hull absorbing light the same way a black hole absorbs everything that gets too close. The admiral in command of the Third Armada was Vice Admiral Petra Solis, tall, precise, with dark hair pulled back tight and a reputation for never wasting a word or a missile. She stood on the bridge of the Dominion and watched the coordinates on her screen resolve as her fleet came into range of Sector 14. And then she saw it. Even on a screen, even in the compressed data of a long-range sensor display, the vessel's presence hit her like a physical thing. She had commanded warships for 20 years. She had approached enemy fleets of hundreds. She had stared down dreadnoughts 3 times the size of her own flagship. She had never felt small before.
She felt small now.
All ships, combat formation Alpha, she said, her voice perfectly controlled. Hold at 75,000 kilometers. Power up weapons. Open a channel. The channel opened. Unidentified vessel, Solis said clearly. You are operating in territory controlled by the Galactic Empire. You are directed to identify yourself, state your origin and your intentions, and stand down immediately. You have 60 minutes to comply before we are authorized to use lethal force. This is your only warning. Silence. The vessel was still moving, slowly, almost lazily, drifting toward the interior of the Empire's border. Not aggressively, not charging, simply moving, like something that hadn't decided yet exactly where it wanted to go. 50 minutes passed. The Third Armada held formation. 58 minutes. 59. 60 minutes, Admiral, her tactical officer said quietly. Solis looked at the vessel on her screen for a long moment. Something in her gut said don't. It was the same instinct that had saved her life 3 times before in situations where the logical choice was also the wrong one. But she had her orders. All ships fire. 800 warships opened fire simultaneously. The space between the fleet and the mysterious vessel lit up like a star being born. Thousands of energy beams, missile salvos, plasma charges, railgun projectiles all converging on a single target in a wall of destruction that had, in the entire history of the Iron Fleet, never failed to reduce anything to dust. Every shot hit. Every single one. And the vessel, Caro, did not even shake. Petra Solis stared at her screen. She had given the order. 800 ships had fired. The combined firepower of the Third Armada, enough energy to crack a small moon's crust, had struck that vessel dead on. She had watched every impact register on her sensor array. Direct hits across the entire hull. Not a single shot had missed. And the vessel continued moving as if nothing had happened at all. No shield flare. No hull breach. No explosion. No deceleration. Not even a change in its slow, unhurried drift toward the interior of the Empire's border. The surface of the vessel hadn't even been scratched. It looked exactly the same as it had before the attack, smooth, dark, and completely indifferent. Tactical, damage report, Solis said, her voice completely flat. Her tactical officer, a young man named Ensign Colehatch, stared at his console with wide eyes. He swallowed. Admiral, there is no damage. Nothing. Our sensors are reading 0 hull penetration, 0 energy absorption, 0 structural impact. It's as if he stopped. As if what, Ensign? As if our weapons passed through it. Like it wasn't really there. But it is there. I can see it. The sensors confirm mass. It's physically present. It just, he shook his head. It didn't take any damage, Admiral. None. The bridge of the Dominion was completely silent. Solis turned back to the main screen and watched the vessel continue its slow drift. Then, for the first time since the Third Armada had arrived, the vessel changed. A light appeared on its hull. Deep, dark blue, almost violet, glowing in a long line down the center of the vessel's body, starting at the back and spreading toward the front like something inside it was waking up. Then another line appeared, then another, and another, until the entire ship was traced in that cold violet light, like veins filling with blood. "What is that?" someone on the bridge whispered. "Power signature," Hatch said, his voice cracking. "Admiral, it is generating an energy reading that is, I can't. Our scale doesn't go this high. I'm going to have to recalibrate." "How high?" Solis demanded. Hatch looked up from his console, and the expression on his face was not something Solis had ever seen from a trained Imperial officer before. It was genuine terror. "More power than our entire fleet combined, Admiral. By a factor of, I can't give you a clean number. The scale doesn't go there. It's like measuring the ocean in teaspoons." Solis immediately opened a channel back to Cross. "Admiral Cross, our weapons have had zero effect. The vessel is now powering up. I recommend immediate." She never finished the sentence. Because Caro, the vessel fired. It wasn't a beam. It wasn't a missile. It wasn't any weapon system Solis had ever seen described in any catalog. What came from the vessel was a pulse, a single, silent, expanding ring of dark energy that moved outward from the ship in every direction at the same time, rippling through space the way a stone ripples water. The pulse washed over the Third Armada. 212 ships, roughly a quarter of the fleet, simply stopped working. Engines off. Power off. Weapons off. Dark and silent and drifting, as if someone had reached into each one and unplugged it. Not destroyed. Not exploded. Just off. 212 crews sitting in suddenly dead ships, in the dark, in silence, with no power and no way to call for help. 212 ships down. Hatch's voice was barely a whisper. "No casualties detected. The crews are alive. But the ships are completely non-functional. Admiral, if it fires again..." "Get us out of here," Solis said. "All ships, emergency retreat.
Now, move."
Move." The remaining 588 ships of the Third Armada turned and ran. It was the first time in 150 years that an Imperial fleet had retreated from anything. Back on the Eternal Throne, the war room watched it happen in real time. Silence, so thick you could have cut it with a blade. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. All eyes turned slowly toward Emperor Valdros. His face had not changed. His expression was still that same controlled stillness he always wore. But something had shifted behind those pale gray eyes, something that had never been there before in 22 years of ruling the most powerful empire in the known galaxy. He was afraid. Not of the ship. Not of the weapon. Not of the fact that his fleet had just run. He was afraid because he suddenly understood, with absolute, stomach-dropping clarity, that for the first time in 300 years, the Galactic Empire had met something it could not simply overwhelm with more force. And he had absolutely no idea what to do about it. "SYMJHY, he said quietly, to no one in particular. "Someone find me answers. Not theories. Not estimates. Answers. What is that ship? Who built it?
What do they want?
And I want to know, I need to know, how do we stop it?" Nobody answered, because nobody knew. While emperors panicked and admirals retreated, in a small research facility on the academic colony of Velos Station, 3 star systems away from Sector 14 and completely unaware of what had just happened, a man named Professor Daniel Carr was arguing with a broken coffee machine. He had been arguing with it for 11 minutes. Daniel was 44 years old. He was the kind of person who looked permanently distracted, always slightly rumpled, always with at least 2 pens somewhere on his person that he'd forgotten about, always in the middle of a thought that had nothing to do with whatever was currently happening around him. He was a professor of xenolinguistics and ancient civilization studies at Velos Station's Research Institute. His specialty was dead languages from extinct species, civilizations that had existed thousands of years ago and left behind nothing but fragments of writing, ruin sites, and the occasional artifact that nobody else could figure out. He was, in the polite assessment of his colleagues, brilliant but completely impractical. He was also, in the less polite assessment of the Imperial military establishment, a waste of a government research grant. Daniel finally gave up on the coffee machine, filled a cup with water instead, and sat down at his desk, which was buried under stacked tablets, printed papers, ancient star charts printed on real paper because he liked the feel of them, and 3 mugs that he was 60% sure still had liquid in them from previous days. He was in the middle of cross-referencing a fragment of writing recovered from a ruin site on the dead moon of HFY when his communication terminal beeped. He ignored it. It beeped again. He kept working. It beeped a 3rd time, and the screen flashed red, priority override, which meant someone had gone through official channels with a military access code to force the connection open. He sighed deeply and accepted the call. The face on the screen was unfamiliar, a young military aide who looked like she'd been awake for 30 hours. Professor Carr? I'm Aide Vela Chun, Office of Fleet Admiral Cross. I need to ask you something, and I need you to take it seriously. Daniel looked at her over the rim of his water cup. I always take things seriously. I'm just rarely in the same room as the people who need me to. She blinked, then pushed forward. We have a transmission. A voice transmission from an unidentified vessel. The voice spoke in standard Imperial language, but there was something underneath it, a second layer in the audio. We've run it through 17 translation algorithms, and all 17 gave us different outputs. None of them made logical sense. Daniel put down his cup very slowly. He was no longer distracted.
Send it to me, he said.
Sir, this is classified. Send it to me or stop wasting my time, he said pleasantly, and meant every word. She sent it. Daniel played it once. Then he played just the secondary audio layer, stripped clean from the primary voice. He listened with his eyes closed, the way he always listened to language fragments, letting the sounds settle in his brain like sediment, not forcing meaning onto them, just letting them be what they were. He listened to it 4 times. Then he opened his eyes, and his face had gone very still. He had heard this pattern before. Not these exact sounds, but the shape of it, the rhythm, the tonal structure. He had spent 6 years studying exactly this pattern in the ruin fragments from HFY and 2 other dead moon sites across the outer territories. It was a language so old that no living civilization had any record of the species that had spoken it. The ruins were dated at over 12,000 years old. Daniel called Vela Chun back. Your transmission has a secondary audio layer, he said, spoken in a language I have studied for 6 years. The species that originally spoke this language was considered to have gone extinct approximately 12,000 years ago. They were not a spacefaring civilization in any way we understood. They had no ships, no stations, no conventional technology. What they did have, based on the ruins, was something we never fully understood. An understanding of physics and space-time that was so advanced that we stopped trying to translate their technical texts because we didn't have the math to understand what they were saying. Vela Chun stared at him. Are you saying that vessel belongs to an extinct civilization? No, Daniel said simply. I am saying that vessel belongs to a civilization that we thought was extinct. There is a very significant difference between those two things. Caro, I need to get to that sector.
Now.
I need to hear the transmission again, live, if they broadcast again. Because if I'm right, he paused. The Empire has made a very serious mistake, and I might be the only person alive who can explain what these people actually said and what they actually want. What did they want? Vela demanded. What did the secondary layer say? Daniel was quiet for a moment. It said, roughly translated, we left. We watched. We warned. You did not listen. The children always burn what they are given. HFY and HFY. We come back to take it away. The line was silent. What does that mean? Vela said finally. It means, Daniel said quietly, that this empire is built on something that was never ours to take. And the original owners have come home. Daniel Carr was on a military transport ship within 4 hours of his call with Vela Chun. They had sent one of the fast courier vessels, small, sleek, no weapons, which told him that Admiral Cross was treating this with real urgency, but also real caution. Not a warship. A fast ship. Get him here quickly. Don't escalate anything.
Good sign.
Someone up the chain still had their head on straight. During the 12-hour journey to the Eternal Throne, Daniel did not sleep. He sat in the small cabin they gave him with every research tablet he owned spread around him and worked, pulling threads together that he had been pulling for years without ever expecting them to lead somewhere this enormous. The civilization from the Heron 4 ruins, the one he had been studying, he had named them the Velhari in his private notes, from a word fragment that appeared repeatedly in their writing and seemed to function as a self-designation. 12,000 years ago, the Velhari had existed across a wide swath of the galaxy, though their remains were frustratingly sparse. No homeworld had ever been identified. No complete city. Only fragments, outposts, observation sites, what appeared to be temporary installations. For years, the academic community had assumed they were a small civilization, a minor species, one of hundreds that had risen and faded across galactic history. But Daniel had always suspected something different, because the fragments they had left behind were not the fragments of a small civilization. The mathematics embedded in their wall carvings, the parts that any scholar could read, described star systems with a precision that only made sense if they had navigated them personally. The maps they had carved into stone showed the entire known galaxy. Not a piece of it. Not an approximation. All of it. In detail so accurate it matched modern imperial star charts almost perfectly. A small civilization didn't map the entire galaxy. An extinct civilization didn't show back up with a 47-kilometer warship. There was something else, too. Something Daniel had found 3 years ago and had written a paper about that had been received by the academic community with the kind of polite silence that meant they thought he'd lost his mind. In the deepest level of the Heron 4 ruins, below everything else, he had found a series of chambers that were sealed, not locked, not blocked, but sealed at a molecular level in a way that no known technology could replicate. When Imperial archaeologists had first discovered the ruins 80 years ago, they had forced those chambers open with cutting equipment. What was inside was now stored in Imperial vaults. Classified. Daniel had seen photographs, not the objects themselves, but the photographs. They were power cores.
Hundreds of them.
Perfectly preserved. Each one the size of a large table. Still active, still generating a low-level energy field after 12,000 years. The Empire's scientists had studied them for decades. They had never figured out how they worked. They had never been able to replicate them. But they had done something that Daniel, when he read the Velhari wall texts more carefully, understood with growing horror was an enormous mistake. They had used them. The power cores were the foundation of the Empire's most advanced technology, the energy grid that powered the Iron Fleet's most powerful weapons, the shield systems on the Eternal Throne, the jump drive network that connected the Empire's star systems. Not all Imperial technology, but the peak of it, the sharpest edge of the blade, built on power sources that were not human, not Imperial, borrowed, stolen from the Velhari, of HFY and HFY. We come back to take it away. Daniel understood now, with ice-cold clarity, exactly what that transmission meant. When he arrived on the Eternal Throne, he was taken immediately to Admiral Cross, not the war room, but Cross's private office, which was smaller and quieter and significantly less crowded. Cross stood when Daniel came in, which surprised him. Military men of Cross's rank rarely stood for academics. "Professor Carr," Cross said, "I need everything you know. Fast." Daniel sat down, folded his hands, and told him. Everything. The Velhari, the ruins, the power cores in the Imperial vaults, the wall texts, the translation of the secondary transmission layer. Cross listened without interrupting. He was good at that, the specific stillness of a man who understood that talking was for gathering information and listening was for getting it. When Daniel finished, Cross was quiet for a very long time. Then he said, "The power cores in our vaults. The ones used in the fleet's top-tier systems. If the Velhari want those back, your fleet's most advanced ships become standard ships," Daniel said. "Your most powerful weapons become average weapons. The Eternal Throne's primary shields fail. The jump drive network goes offline." He paused. "You built the top tier of your empire on foundations that were never yours. And the people who built those foundations have come back and knocked on the door." Cross looked at him steadily. "Can you communicate with them?" "I believe so. If they transmit again, or if we can open a channel, yes. I can speak to them in their language." "What do we ask for?" "I don't think we ask for anything," Daniel said quietly. "I think we listen. We owe them that much, at least. Cross nodded once. He reached for his communication panel. Kara, we're changing our approach. The message went out on all frequencies, in standard Imperial language, and because Daniel had spent the flight overwriting the text carefully in the Velhari phonetic system, in the Velhari language as well. It was the first time anyone had spoken that language out loud in 12,000 years, and Daniel's voice shook slightly as the recording was made, not from fear but from the weight of what it meant. The message was simple. We hear you. We want to understand. We are listening. They sent it. Then they waited. The vessel was now deep inside Imperial border space. It had crossed without stopping, without asking, without any military force able to slow it even slightly. The entire Iron Fleet was scrambling. Every ship that could be pulled from its post was being redirected towards Sector 14 and beyond. It made no difference. The vessel moved through blockades and weapons fire and massed formations the way a river moves through fog, simply, without effort, without caring. 6 hours after the message was sent, the response came. Not a voice transmission this time. A light. A single beam of that deep violet light, extending from the vessel directly toward the Eternal Throne. Not a weapon, not an attack, but a precise, focused beam that terminated at the station's main communication array. And through that beam came not just sound but data. Vast, deep, structured data that overwhelmed the station's standard intake systems and had to be rerouted through 3 separate backup arrays before it could be managed. Daniel sat in front of the primary communication terminal with a headset on, and his eyes closed, and he listened. His hands were trembling. Not because he was afraid. Because he had spent his entire adult life studying fragments of a dead civilization, piecing together scraps of language from broken walls, writing papers nobody read about a species nobody believed in, and now that species was talking to him. The voice was the same as the transmission. Neither male nor female. Neither young nor old. Carrying that weight, that quality of enormous patience stretched to its very edge. It spoke in Velhari. Daniel listened. He translated, imperfectly slowly, stopping to ask for repetition 3 times, filling in gaps with context from years of study, but he translated. This is what the voice said. We are the Velhari. We do not belong to your time. 12,000 of your years ago, we did not die. We left. The galaxy was young, and its children were still learning to stand. We had seen what happens when those who can reach for stars are given tools they cannot yet understand. We had made that mistake ourselves long before. So we left our tools behind, not as gifts, as tests. To be found when you were ready, not before. Daniel translated as it spoke, whispering the words into a secondary mic so cross and the other officers listening in the room could follow in real time. You were not ready. You found the tools, and you used them not to grow but to dominate. You used our power cores to build a machine of control. 40,000 ships. Trillions of lives under one hand. This is not growth. This is the same mistake we made 12,000 years ago, and we paid for it in ways we will not describe to you, because you would not understand the magnitude of the cost. The room was very still. Daniel kept translating, kept his voice steady. We do not come to destroy you. Destruction is the language of those who have no better words. We come to correct. We will take back what was ours. What you built without our tools will remain. What you built with them, we reclaim. And then if you choose, we will talk. But that choice is yours. Caro. The beam went dark. The transmission ended. Daniel took off his headset and set it carefully on the console. He felt like he had just swum across an ocean and crawled up onto the shore on the other side, completely spent, completely overwhelmed, but also more alive than he had felt in years. He turned to face the room. Cross stood behind him, his expression unreadable, but his eyes carrying the weight of everything he had just heard. Around the room, generals and admirals and intelligence chiefs stood in various stages of the same complicated emotion, a mixture of fear and awe and something that might, in a quieter moment, become humility. And then General Brine, because it was always going to be General Brine, slammed his fist on the table. This is a negotiating tactic. They want us afraid. They want us to hand over our technology without a fight. We are the Galactic Empire. We do not surrender our assets to General. Cross's voice was very quiet. Sit down. Brine stared at him.
Sit
down. Brine sat. Cross looked at Daniel. Can you reply? In their language? Yes, Daniel said. Tell them we want to talk. Tell them, ab SYMJHY, we understand what they are saying. Tell them we are listening. And ask them, what does a correction look like? What do they actually want from us?
Daniel nodded. He put the headset back on.
And for the first time in 12,000 years, a human being sent a message back to the Velhari, not in fear, not in defiance, but in the simple, fragile, enormous act of being willing to hear the answer. While Daniel Carr was making history in the communication room, Emperor Valdros was making a decision that would define everything that came after. He had been listening to the translation from a separate speaker feed in his private war council chamber, a smaller room adjacent to the main war room, where he met only with his most senior advisors when he needed to think without an audience. With him were Admiral Cross, General Brine, Dr. Voss, and two others, Chancellor Mira Fenn, his chief political advisor, a sharp, watchful woman who had survived 4 emperors and had an instinct for power dynamics that bordered on supernatural, and Lord Commander Edic Shore, head of the Empire's intelligence division. When Daniel's translation finished, Valdros said nothing for a long time. He stood with his back to the room, looking out at the stars through the single large window that occupied one entire wall of the chamber. Finally, he turned around. What we are actually discussing, he said slowly, is whether we hand over the power cores. Because that is what they want. And without those cores, we lose 23% of the fleet's total combat capability, Cross said. Specifically, the top-tier weapon systems on our most advanced warships. The primary shield array on this station. The long-range jump drive network. Not all jump capability, but the fastest and longest-range connections. The outer rim would be cut off from rapid response. We become slower, less powerful. But he paused. We remain. The Empire remains. The fleet remains. 85% of our standard systems run on our own technology. We don't collapse. We diminish. We show weakness, Brine said flatly. We comply with the demands of a single vessel, and every civilization in this galaxy that has spent 300 years living under our authority will read that as an invitation. The moment we look weak, every rebellion, every separatist movement, every faction that's been waiting for a crack in the armor, they all move at once. We hand over the power cores, and we start a civil war within our own empire. There was truth in that. Nobody in the room could deny it. Or, Chancellor Fenn said quietly, she rarely spoke first, but when she did, people listened. We frame it differently. We don't hand anything over under duress. We choose to return what was borrowed.
Proactively. Publicly.
We tell the Empire that we discovered the true origin of these technologies and chose, of our own sovereign will, to honor the rightful claim of their creators.
She paused.
Power is not only military. It is also narrative. If the Emperor is the one who makes this choice, not the one who is forced, the story is entirely different. Silence. Valdros looked at Fenn for a long moment. Then he looked at Cross. Then, very slowly, he looked at Brine. You want to fight them, Valdros said to Brine. Not a question. I want to not surrender, Brine said. What is your proposed strategy for fighting a vessel that our weapons cannot damage, that can disable 200 ships with a single pulse, that has traveled to our home station without any force in this galaxy being able to stop it? Brine's jaw was tight. We find a weakness. Every weapon has a weakness. And while we spend months or years finding that weakness, if it exists, what does this vessel do to our empire? What does it do to the people living in those 40 star systems? Valdros's voice was calm, not angry, just precise, like a blade finding its edge. I did not build this empire to gamble it on a theory, General. He turned back to the window. I built it to last. The room waited. Caro, Valdros said finally. Arrange a full council session. I want the transmission transcript read into the official record. I want Dr. Carr in the room. And I want a communication channel to that vessel. Open and ready. He paused one final time. I am going to talk to them myself. The full council chamber of the Eternal Throne held 300 seats arranged in sweeping tiers around a central floor, and every single one of those seats was occupied when Emperor Valdros walked in. Admirals, generals, governors, diplomatic envoys from allied species, intelligence chiefs, the entire political and military architecture of the Galactic Empire gathered in one room. Daniel Carr stood on the central floor with a communication terminal in front of him and a headset around his neck, and the feeling of a man who had walked into the absolute last place he ever expected to find himself. Valdros walked to the center of the floor and stood beside Daniel, without ceremony. The channel opened. The violet beam connected to the station's array. The voice came through, and this time, through Daniel's simultaneous translation running on a secondary speaker system, the entire chamber heard both the original Velhari and Daniel's real-time translation. "You speak yourself," the voice said. "The one who rules." "I speak myself," Valdros said. Daniel translated his words into Velhari as he spoke them, a strange, double-layered conversation that made the whole chamber feel like something between a summit and a ritual. "This is progress," the Velhari voice said. "The last ruler of this empire sent weapons. You send words. This is a small difference. But small differences matter." "I want to understand what you are asking," Valdros said. "Not to negotiate. To understand. What do you actually want from this civilization, from this empire, beyond the return of the power cores?" A pause. Longer than the others. "Nothing," the voice said. "And everything." "Explain." "We want nothing that is yours. We want everything that was ours. The cores. The 12 vault sites across your territory where other Velhari materials are being stored and studied. Our ruins, not to be excavated and removed, but to be left alone. This is all." "And after? After we return these things?" Another pause. "After, we talk. Not about what you owe us. Not about punishment. About what comes next. You have built an empire on stolen foundations, and it has made you powerful, but it has not made you wise. Wisdom is not a thing we can give you, but we can offer if you choose to accept what we offered the last civilization we found standing on borrowed power." "What did you offer them?" The voice was quiet for a moment, a different quality of quiet than before. Something in it shifted. "They refused before we could offer it. They attacked us. They destroyed themselves trying to destroy us. Their star system is the one your records call the Velian Nebula. There is nothing there now but gas and memory." The chamber was completely silent. Everyone understood what had just been said. The Velian Nebula, one of the most famous astronomical features in the known galaxy, a vast, beautiful cloud of glowing gas, was not a natural phenomenon.
It was a graveyard.
Daniel's voice had gone very quiet as he translated. He could feel the weight of every person in the chamber landing on the same realization. Valdros stood perfectly still for a moment. "Then, what did you want to offer them? What do you offer us?" "Knowledge," the Velhari voice said simply. "Not our technology. Your people are not ready for that, and we will not make the same mistake twice. But knowledge, understanding, the real shape of what this galaxy is. What exists beyond the edges of your charts. What is coming toward this part of the universe from the deep dark that none of your telescopes can see yet. And how, if you choose to stand together rather than under one throne, you might survive it." The silence in the chamber now was different from any silence that had come before it. Valdros stood on the central floor of his council chamber, with 300 of the most powerful people in the known galaxy listening, and he was quiet for a very long time. Daniel watched him. He saw the exact moment when the Emperor, this man who had ruled with absolute power for 22 years, who believed power was the only honest language, understood that he was being given a choice between the Empire and the future, between the throne and the galaxy, between the story he had always been the center of and the much larger, older, stranger story that had always been going on around him. Valdros turned to look at Daniel. Not for translation. Not for help. Just for a moment, as if he needed to see another human face. Daniel gave him the smallest nod. Valdros turned back to the channel. "Ob SYMJHY," he said quietly. And then in Velhari, Daniel had taught him the phrase during their brief exchange before the session. He repeated it. HFY. We are listening. What happened next was not what anyone in the galaxy expected. The war that every news feed was screaming about, the new galactic conflict, the mysterious vessel, the fleet retreat, the Empire in panic, did not happen. Not in the way anyone predicted. What happened instead was 3 weeks of the most extraordinary and quietly historic conversations that had ever taken place in the known galaxy. Daniel Carr barely slept. He existed on bad station food and the occasional cup of coffee and the absolute electric aliveness of doing the thing he had trained his whole life for, translating between two civilizations, bridging 12,000 years of silence, turning incomprehension into understanding one fragile sentence at a time. The Velhari sent 2 representatives aboard a small vessel, small by their standards, which meant it was still 3 times the size of an Imperial shuttle, to the station for direct talks. They did not look the way anyone expected. They looked almost human, in the way that a mountain almost looks like a hill. Tall, thin, with skin the color of deep water and eyes that were entirely silver. No pupil, no iris, just 2 smooth silver mirrors that reflected everything in the room. They moved slowly and deliberately. They spoke in their own language, but with a patience that felt ancient. Their names, or rather, the closest approximation Daniel could produce in Imperial pronunciation, were Suveth and Carrie. Suveth was the one who had spoken in the initial transmissions. Up close, the voice carried even more weight, the quality of something that had seen an enormous amount of time and was not particularly hurried by any of it. Carrie was quieter, more watchful, and had the disconcerting habit of looking at whoever was speaking as if they were an extremely interesting but not very large thing in a very large landscape. The vault sites were identified. The power cores and other materials were cataloged. The return would take 4 months of logistics, not because the Velhari demanded urgency, but because they were very precise about how their materials were handled and transported. The ruins on Heron 4 and the other sites were formally declared protected territories. Imperial archaeologists were permitted to continue studying them, but not to remove anything further. And then the Velhari told them what was coming. Daniel translated it in a private session with Valdros and Cross and a small group of senior advisors, because the Velhari had said, gently but clearly, that this particular information should be delivered to decision-makers first, and decisions should be made about how and when to share it more broadly. What was coming was not something Daniel had a word for in Imperial language. The Velhari called it the Dravath, a word that combined the concepts of tide, storm, extinction, and transformation into a single sound. It was not a fleet, not a weapon, not an enemy civilization. It was a phenomenon, a wave of spatial disruption, something between a cosmic storm and a collapse of the physics underlying normal space that moved through the galaxy on a cycle of approximately 40,000 years. The last time it had passed through the inner galaxy, it had, according to Velhari records, destroyed 17 civilizations and fundamentally altered the physical laws of 11 star systems.
It was coming again.
Not tomorrow. Not next year. In approximately 800 years. 800 years was not a long time on the scale of civilizational preparation. 800 years, Cross said, after a long silence. That's more than enough time to prepare, yes, Suveth said, through Daniel's translation. If you use the time well. If you remain whole enough to use it. An empire of 40,000 warships pointed inward at its own population is not a civilization that is preparing for anything. It is a civilization that is eating itself. Valdros sat very still. What does preparation look like? It looks like what you almost failed to do this week. It looks like listening. It looks like building together rather than conquering alone. It looks like becoming something larger than a throne. There was a very long silence. SYMJHY, Valdros said, very quietly. And then, Caro, for the first time in 22 years of absolute rule, Emperor Valdros III asked a question he had never asked anyone before. Tell me what to do. General Otto Brine resigned from military service 12 days after the Velhari talks concluded. He submitted his resignation in writing, which was the proper procedure, and in it he said nothing about the talks or the Velhari or the Emperor's decisions. He simply said he had served for 40 years, and it was time to go. He left the Eternal Throne on a standard transport and retired to his home planet. Nobody stopped him. Nobody blamed him. He was not a villain. He was simply a man built entirely for one kind of world who had found himself standing in a different kind of world and had the self-awareness, at least, to know he no longer fit. What Valdros did in the weeks after the Velhari talks was not dramatic in the way that battles or explosions are dramatic. It was quiet, structural, the kind of change that doesn't make for exciting news but reshapes everything over time. He began with the Iron Fleet, not dismantling it. That was neither practical nor wise. The Velhari had not asked for disarmament. What they had asked for, in their precise and patient way, was a change in purpose. 40,000 warships pointed inward was a machine of domination. 40,000 warships pointed outward toward what was coming in 800 years was something else entirely. A shield, a preparation, a reason to build rather than to control. It was Admiral Cross who framed the reorganization proposal. He had always been better at the architecture of strategy than at its emotional symbolism. He spent 3 weeks with his staff designing what he called the outward reform, a gradual restructuring of the Iron Fleet's mandate from internal enforcement to deep space exploration, defense research, and preparation protocols based on the information the Velhari had shared. It was not popular. Not immediately. There were 17 worlds in the outer territories that had been under imperial military governance for generations, their economies, their politics, their daily lives structured around the presence of imperial warships in orbit. Removing those ships was not liberation to everyone. For some it was. For others it was terrifying uncertainty. Valdros handled this personally, which surprised everyone. He traveled physically on his flagship, system by system, to 12 of the most complicated cases and met with their governing councils in person. He was not warm.
He was not charming.
But he was direct and he was honest, and he did not pretend the changes were without cost, and somehow that was enough. Not everywhere. Not for everyone. But enough. Marcus Webb, the young analyst from Sector 14 who had first detected the Velhari vessel, was transferred to a new position that Daniel Carr created, somewhat accidentally, by suggesting to Cross that they needed a standing monitoring unit for the boundary sectors. The unit was called Watch Station Carr. Daniel was mortified by the name but couldn't get anyone to change it. Marcus was its first and for a while only analyst, working alongside 3 Velhari observers who had elected to remain in Imperial space during the transition period. He no longer drank cold coffee and tracked asteroid clusters shaped like ducks. He tracked the deep dark beyond the edge of the galaxy's charts, watching for the first whispers of something 800 years away, building databases and recording instruments that would outlast him by centuries. He found purpose in it. Real purpose. The kind that made you get up in the morning with something in your chest that felt different from dread. Captain Dana Reeve, who had led the scout wing in Sector 14 and sent that first calm, professional report back to Cross, was given command of the first long-range exploration vessel under the new fleet mandate, a ship designed not for combat, but for distance. She named it ISS Patience. She flew it toward the outer edge of the galaxy's mapped territory, into the dark beyond the last charted star system, and sent back data packets that arrived at the Eternal Throne weeks after she'd collected them. Each one was denser and stranger, and more wondrous than the last. Dr. Voss threw herself into the scientific collaboration the Velhari had tentatively offered, not technology transfer, as Suveth had been clear about, but theoretical exchange, conceptual frameworks, mathematical foundations, the shape of things. It was the most difficult intellectual work of her life, and also the most exciting, and she was 62 years old and had never felt more alive. And Daniel Carr, Professor Daniel Carr, who had argued with a coffee machine on Velos Station 8 months ago and had no expectation of ever being anything other than a footnote in an academic journal, was offered a permanent position on the Eternal Throne as the Empire's first and only official Velhari liaison. He accepted on one condition: they fix the coffee machine in his new office. They did. Of SYMJHY. the galaxy began to change. 8 months after the Velhari vessel first appeared in Sector 14, it was still there. Not in Sector 14 anymore. It had moved, over the course of those months, slowly and unhurriedly, to a position approximately halfway between the outer border of the Empire and its center. In the charts of Watch Station Car, it showed up as a steady, faint signature, present, watchful, unmoving. Like a lighthouse at sea. Like a parent standing just far enough back to let a child walk on their own, but close enough to catch them if they fell. The Iron Fleet's warships gave it a wide berth. Not out of fear, exactly, though there was still some of that and probably always would be. More out of respect. The kind of respect you develop when you realize that something is not your enemy, never was your enemy, and is in fact the only reason you still exist. Marcus Webb could see it on his long-range sensors every morning when he started his shift. He had started saying good morning to it. Not because he expected a response, though 3 times, early in his tenure, the vessel had pulsed that deep violet light briefly when his shift began, which he chose to interpret as acknowledgement and which he told no one about, because it would have sounded ridiculous. On the day that marked 8 months since the first contact, Daniel Carr sat in his office on the Eternal Throne, a real office now, with working equipment and a functional coffee machine and, increasingly, a cluttered desk that was starting to look very much like his old one on Bellows Station, and wrote the final entry in the official first contact report he had been compiling since the beginning. He wrote about what the Velhari had been, what they were, what they had seen in 12,000 years of watching civilizations rise and burn and occasionally, very occasionally, choose something different. He wrote about the Dravath and the 800 years and the preparations being made and the conversations still happening and the distance still to travel. He wrote about an emperor who had chosen at the most difficult possible moment to ask tell me what to do instead of bring me more weapons, and what that choice had cost him politically and what it might eventually mean for the galaxy. He wrote about a young analyst who had found a vessel on a routine monitoring shift and called it in with shaking hands, and in doing so had changed the course of history. He wrote about a captain sailing toward the unknown with a ship called Patience. He wrote about a general who had resigned not in defeat but in honesty. And then he wrote about the Velhari themselves, Suveth and Carrie, and the voice that had spoken through 12,000 years of silence with the patience of something that had been watching for a very long time and had finally decided the time was right. They did not come to destroy us, he wrote. They came because they had watched us long enough to believe, not to know but to believe, that we were capable of something more than what we had built. That is a remarkable thing, when you think about it. To watch a civilization for 12,000 years and still hold on to the possibility that it might surprise you. I think they were right to wait. I think we owe it to them, and to ourselves, and to everything that is coming in 800 years to prove it. He saved the file. He leaned back in his chair. He looked out the window at the stars, the same stars that humans had been looking at for as long as humans had existed, the same stars that the Velhari had mapped 12,000 years ago with a precision that still made his heart ache with something he couldn't name. His communication terminal beeped. He looked at the screen. It was Marcus from Watch Station Car. The message read, "The vessel moved this morning. First time in 3 weeks. It moved closer to the station by about 40,000 kilometers. I know that doesn't mean anything officially, but I thought you should know. Also, it pulsed violet 3 times. I checked the timing. It pulsed at exactly the same moment you sent your final report to the official archive. I don't know if that's a coincidence." Daniel read it twice. He looked out the window. In the vast dark between the stars, impossibly far away and perfectly visible to instruments that had been calibrated to watch for it, a single vessel, 47 kilometers of smooth dark metal and ancient knowing, sat quietly in the space between where the Empire ended and where everything else began. Caro, Daniel thought. They're still watching. He smiled. He typed back to Marcus. It's not a coincidence. Go say good morning. He picked up his coffee. It was hot this time. He looked at the stars. HFY, he thought. We're just getting started. Glowing star the end, glowing star.